meet you.
Nice to meet you. What's your name?
Jim.
Jim. Nice to meet you.
Let's do. All right. Good evening, everyone. Each year I host this program, I like to start with a confession, and that confession is that I read banned books. I know. And I have the feeling that I am not alone in that behavior amongst those sitting in this room either, so I see your faces. My name is Jim, and I'm one of the youth and teen librarians here at Fayetteville Public Library. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and welcome. This is our celebration of Banned Books Week, which is next week officially, but we are celebrating early. We have a building closure next week for maintenance, which is a small irony because our library will not be accessible to the public during Banned Books Week, so it may be a social experiment. We're going to find out. Thank you for being here at our celebration of Banned Books as we reveal the winning art of the 2024 Banned Books Trading Card Project. This is the project's third year, and while the library will be closed next week during Banned Books Week, we're excited to continue these conversations around censorship through the rest of 2024 as the winning art hangs in our galleries on the third and fourth floors this year. It's going to be all over the place. Tonight's guest speaker is Dr. Sean Connors. Dr. Connors is an associate professor of English education at the University of Arkansas. His scholarship and teaching focus on comics and the application of diverse critical perspectives to young adult literature. He is the editor of The Politics of Panem, Challenging Genres, a collection of critical essays about the Hunger Games series. And he is co-editor of Teaching Girls on Fire, Essays of Dystopian Young Adult Literature in the Classroom. And Dr. Connors remains my favorite professor that I had at the U of A, our coursework often covering some of the most frequently challenged titles in young adult literature. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sean Connors.
Oh my goodness. Can I just tell you how exciting it is to see so many people gathered in one place to talk about morally offensive books? It's just amazing. You Arkansans never cease to amaze me. As Jim said, my name is Sean Connors, and for the past 15 years, I have been a professor at the University of Arkansas. And in addition to working with students in our English program, I work with pre-service and in-service school teachers. I also taught high school English for another 15 years in various parts of the country. And I taught in New York, I taught on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona, and I later taught in Flagstaff, Arizona as well. And I thought I'd segue into my talk tonight by focusing on my own experience with Banned Books Week. Does anybody know when the American Library Association began celebrating Banned Books Week? I knew Jim would. That was quick hand. 1982, I was in 7th grade when the American Library Association embarked on this, what has become an annual event. And throughout my career as an educator, certainly, it's always the banned books and banned book weeks have always been in the background. But I don't think until 2022, I had any real understanding of why we celebrate this event this week each year. So last year, I spoke at this same event, and I shared with the audience a number of headlines from U.S. media throughout 2022 addressing the frequency of challenges to books in school and public libraries. And I ended by citing this headline, which predicted that book banning may increase in 2023. Sure enough, it did, all right? Headlines this year included book bans continue to struggle in public school, continue to surge, in public schools. Number of book bans rose sharply in fall 23. Books banned across U.S. hit record highs in 2023-2024 school year. And you might think that a large number of challenges to books are coming from the southern United States, and you would be correct, they are. Places like South Carolina and Virginia, and of course, not to be outdone, Florida is banning books about book banning. But it's also an issue in the Midwest, in states like Iowa and Ohio, where I did my doctoral work. And it's an issue in northeastern states, states like Massachusetts and Connecticut. It's an issue that is causing emotional toil for many authors, but I would add, less often recognized, it's an issue that's causing emotional turmoil for librarians and for educators. In 2023, book ban attempts soared by 65%. Tonight, it's my honor to recognize the top 10, if I can get it to work, not going to work, most frequently challenged books in 2023. If you would join me in welcoming book number 10, published in 2006, Patricia McCormick's Sold, which is the story of a Nepali teenage girl who is sold into the sex trafficking trade. I actually attended the year the book came out. I saw Patricia McCormick speak about the research she did for this book, and it was one of the most moving, impactful talks that I've heard. I think everyone was in tears. I kind of held my head back so they didn't actually run out, but everybody else in the room was fully in tears. At number 9, Let's Talk About It, published in 2021. It is a graphic work of nonfiction, graphic novel that offers an overview of sex and relationships for teenagers and young adults. It was challenged, like Patricia McCormick's book, on the grounds that it was sexually explicit and also for promoting sex education. And number 8, Ellen Hopkins, who sort of lives on the ALA's banned book list, her book, Tricks, which is about 5 very different teenagers in 5 different parts of the country who all find their way into prostitution. It recounts their stories. It was also challenged for being sexually explicit, as well as depicting drug use and rape and addressing LGBTQ content. That book just looks dangerous, eye patch. Published in 2012, Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl is the story of Greg Gaines, who's an awkward senior in high school who doesn't identify or belong to any social groups, and his mother encourages him to rekindle a relationship with an ex-girlfriend who has been recently diagnosed with leukemia. Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl has been challenged on the grounds that it's sexually explicit and profane. 1970, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, the story of Pakola, whoa. Somebody's in a hurry here. The story of Pakola Breedlove, who is a African-American girl who has internalized her community's perceptions that she's ugly as a result of her mannerisms and skin color, and she longs to have blue eyes, which she associates with whiteness. Flamer, at number 6, is a semi-autobiographical graphic novel by Mike Curato, which tells the story of a teenager who is experiencing bullying for being perceived by other boys as showing stereotypically gay characteristics. At number 4, another book that inhabits this list frequently, Stephen Chbosky's The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which follows an introverted teenager through his freshman year of high school. Like many of these other books, it's been challenged on the grounds that it's sexually explicit, addresses LGBTQ plus content, depicts rape and drug use, and contains profanity. And number 3, Juno Dawson's This Book is Gay, which was published in the UK in 2014, in the US in 2015. This book has been challenged, well, it identifies as gay, right? So you probably figured that one out. All Boys Aren't Blue, at number 2, by George M. Johnson, who documents his journey growing up as a queer black man. The book has been challenged or banned for LGBTQ plus content and claimed to be sexually explicit. And number 1, returning after several years, at number 1, is Maya Kobabe's Genderqueer, which is a graphic memoir recounting the author's journey from adolescence to adulthood and their exploration of sexual identity and gender. Genderqueer is consistently challenged or banned for LGBTQ plus content, as well as claims that it's sexually explicit. So how did we get here? How did we get here? Because what we're experiencing today has never been an issue on the scale that it has been in my lifetime, as it is right now. Let's go back to ancient Greece. You're going to be here a while tonight, people. We'll go back to ancient Greece. When Plato wrote the Republic around 375 BC, he actually talked about young children and their reading habits. Specifically, he cautioned, and I'm quoting the Republic here, I'm quoting Plato, "We ought to esteem it of the greatest importance that the fictions which children first hear should be adapted in the most perfect manner to the promotion of virtue." So all the way back, I'd like to tell my students, we can trace this concern. As literacy is appearing, we can trace this concern with what children are reading. We jump ahead 2,000 years to John Newbery, a book publisher in London, England. Does anybody recognize that name, John Newbery? The Newbery Award for Children's Literature. He is known amongst children's literature scholars as identifying children as a market for the books. And he wrote what many scholars consider the first children's book, which was titled A Little Pretty Pocketbook, intended for the instruction and amusement of little Master Tommy and pretty Miss Polly, with 2 letters from Jack the Giant Killer, as also a ball and pin cushion, the use of which will infallibly make Tommy a good boy and Polly a good girl, to which is added a little songbook, being a new attempt to teach children the use of the English alphabet by way of diversion. They don't make titles like that for books anymore. What's notable about this first children's book is it was morally didactic. As the title suggests, the book actually came with toys. If you were a boy, you got a little ball. If you were a girl, you got a pin cushion. Both of the toys were black and white, or red and black. And the idea was that children at the end of each day would take a pin and they would place it in the toy depending on how they had behaved for that day. So if they had behaved well, they would put it in the black. If they behaved poorly, they would put it in the red side. So the idea was that in addition to reading these didactic little poems and rhymes, it would become a process of socializing children to behave in socially sanctioned ways. Jump forward to the 19th century, when the concept of teenager or adolescent did not exist. People like Louisa Alcott and Mark Twain really understood themselves to be writing books like Little Women and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn for adults. And yet there was still a concern with fostering moral development in young readers. In the early 1900s, Edward Stratemeyer, who is recognized as one of the first large-scale book packagers in the United States and a prolific writer, began a chain of different series aimed at adolescents and children. Anybody recognize the girl on the right? Nancy Drew, yes, was an Edward Stratemeyer creation. And on the left is the Hardy Boys. Some of you might be old enough to remember the Bobbsey twins. He created them as well. And these series books were notable in that many teachers and librarians looked at them with a sort of skeptical eye. There was a concern that reading these books, which were these superficial stories that were told over a series of volumes, was injurious to their literary tastes. But when we get to the 1940s and the 1950s, we really ramp things up with what's known as the Great Comic Book Scare. So when comic books first appeared in the late 1930s, they featured mostly superheroes. And many of the people who were reading as young adults comic books later, a few years later, found themselves in Europe or in the Pacific Theater fighting World War II, and they continued to read comics. When they came home as men, many of them had lost their interest in these stories about costumed Caped Crusaders. And so the publishers began to market storylines that might be more appealing to this audience. And initially that included crime comics. Later it included horror comics. And this elicited, believe it or not, we think of rock and roll as the first youth rebellion movement. It wasn't. It was comic books. This elicited these books tremendous fear in many adults. In fact, it culminated in the early 1950s in various parts of the United States with communities sending young children out into the local community, knocking on doors. Do you have any comic books in your home? We're collecting them for the good of the community. They would bring them to a local school or to a public place. They would dump them into bins, and they would hold a burning of comic books, which is all the more amazing when you consider the fact that just a few years earlier, millions of people have died in the service of combating a fascist regime that, amongst other things, was known for burning books, right? The Great Textbook War in West Virginia in 1974, briefly, in the Kanawha County, West Virginia. In 1974, following newly released state guidelines, a local English language arts teacher book selection committee followed new state guidelines, one of which, for adopting books, one of which recommended that schools, in the wake of the civil rights movement, adopt in the curriculum books by writers of color and that featured people of color. Into this situation steps Alice Moore, who is depicted here, who had recently moved with her husband, who was a minister, and her children from Tennessee to Kanawha County. And she inserted herself through a fair election on the county school board. She took offense to a number of the titles that the school districts were adopting. And she rallied the support of many, many people in the community who virulently opposed the adoptions of books, particularly those featuring people of color. As the protests grew, the Ku Klux Klan eventually showed an interest and turned up, and the situation spiraled into bomb threats at local schools, the dynamiting of this local school board place, the building where they would meet, guns being shot at local school buses over anger of the fact that children were still going to school and not joining a boycott by staying home. And I even think that little protest poster there on the right, I don't know if you can make that out, no peaceful coexistence with satanic communism. Like, I feel like that's 2024 right there, you know, that could be today. And here we are in 2024, where book bans soar 65%. So this is why our local libraries invite us to celebrate Banned Book Week, so that we are aware of and attentive to efforts to suppress ideas and information in our communities. The question is, what can we do to combat censorship throughout the rest of the year? This is 1 week of the year. What do we do for the other 51? So I'm going to propose some possible remedies. This is going to be really radical, but maybe we might remember to respect young people, right? I've heard a lot in the last year about parental rights. And I do not have children, but as a teacher, I promise you, I support every parent's right to decide what their child is going to read. But there's a other side of this coin that never gets talked about. And I want to talk about that because young people have rights too. In fact, they have a protected constitutional First Amendment right to access ideas and information. We talk a lot about freedom today in the United States. Freedom, freedom, freedom. There are different types of freedom. There's freedom to and there's freedom from. I believe that all parents have the freedom to choose what their children read. I also believe that I have the freedom from parents dictating what my children or my siblings' children will read. And I think respecting our young people and acknowledging their ability to deal with difficult issues is important. I think it's also important to remember that when we erase books, which is what censorship does, when we erase books, we erase the communities of people who are represented in those books. If I go back to the 2022 most frequently banned books, here's the top 10 from a year ago. They don't get the red carpet treatment. Isn't it interesting that 2, 4, 5, 6 of the 10 are books by writers of color about characters of color? Fast forward a year here to 2023, and look at this. 7 of the top 10 most frequently challenged books are books that feature LGBTQ characters. The American Library Association has recognized this, and they've raised an alarm, as this headline suggests, suggesting that these book challenging are inordinately targeting mostly LGBTQ people and people of color. I am a fan of Sherman Alexie, who's a poet and writer. He's a member of the Spokane Indian tribe. And I want to quote him here, because I think that it becomes very clear what this issue is really about. And in an essay published in the Wall Street Journal in 2011, here's what Sherman Alexie wrote. When some cultural critics fret about the ever more appalling young adult books, they aren't trying to protect African American teenagers who are forced to walk through metal detectors on their way into school, or Mexican American teens enduring the cultural schizophrenic life of being American citizens and the children of illegal immigrants, or Native American teens growing up on third world reservations, or poor white kids trying to survive the meth haze trailer parks. They aren't trying to protect the poor from poverty or victims from rapists. No, they're simply trying to protect their privileged notions of what literature is and should be. They're trying to protect privileged children, or at least the seemingly privileged. And I think that really gets at the heart of what is motivating these book challenges. But it's not just issues of race and sexuality, it's also politics. You've probably heard a lot about the two Project 2025 in this year's politics. And we can look at the ways that so-called cultural war issues are used to divide us and for the benefit of political parties in elections. I just want to call to your attention, page 5 of the 2025 Project book is very clear about the issue of reading, access to books. Pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders. And telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. This same issue touches much more immediately here at home. You may or may not be familiar with 2 legislative acts that our state legislature passed in 2023, both in March of 2023. The first, Act 372, holds librarians and book vendors criminally liable for knowingly making available to minors material that would appeal to a prurient interest in sex. Thankfully, that has been blocked by a federal court and is awaiting future hearings. And you may be familiar with the LEARNS Act, a portion of which prohibits the teaching of critical race theory in Arkansas's schools. A third thing we can do, advocate for the freedom to read, right? This is something we often talk about with all that's going on, what can I do? This is something we can do. What might that look like? Maybe send a letter to your favorite banned or challenged author, thanking them for their work. Or maybe send a postcard to your librarians or your child's teacher or your grandchildren's teachers, expressing your support for their work on the front lines. I promise you, as educators, we hear about all the things we do wrong. And that is a lot, apparently. We very seldom hear about what it is we do right. And I know when we do hear that, it's greatly appreciated. Collect banned books and help kids in book banning regions get the books that speak to their lives with honesty and compassion. We don't have to look far to do this. There's a local business, black-owned business here in Fayetteville, Trendsetters Barbershop, and the owner, Nick Jones, is making a really valiant effort to build a library for young adults of color who come into his barbershop. To kind of put my money literally where my mouth is, this afternoon I stopped at our local bookseller and picked up a copy of Cinderella is Dead, which is written by a black queer author and which features an all characters of color in an adaptation of the stories of the Cinderella story. I'm going to stop by his barbershop tomorrow and donate the book. That's something we could all do as well. Vote and encourage people you know how to make their voices heard. Exercise your reading rights and encourage your book club to read rebellious books. If you don't have a book club, start one. Call yourselves the Notorious Naughty Readers. You can use that. All right. Also advocacy, what the people whose work we're celebrating here tonight has done, calling attention to banned books. And then finally, I just want to say, we've heard a lot about democracy in the last couple of years. And it's no secret. We can rewrite history as much as we may want to. But the fact remains that the Founding Fathers firmly believed that for a democratic society to function, there had to be free access to ideas and information. And that's something that we need to be willing to advocate for. But the most important thing that we can do is this. Read. Read and defend your freedom and the freedom of others to read. Thank you. I'm going to turn things over to Jim and allow him to introduce the winners of this year's Banned Book Week's Call for Artists.
Thank you again, Dr. Connors. You know, someday we may not have to bring him back to talk about this topic, but 2024 was not the year, so we're very grateful to have him lead us through that insight. Each year, the American Library Association's Office of Intellectual Freedom sets a theme for Banned Books Week. Our 2024 theme is Freed Between the Lines. The office writes, "We can find freedom in the pages of a book, but censorship threatens that freedom, along with our libraries. Let's honor our freedom to read. Let's be freed between the lines." This year's theme was presented to our artists in our open call for submissions of 2D interpretations of banned or challenged books or authors. We continue to get more submissions than the previous year's contest, and each year we have the arduous task of narrowing it down to our top 5. But we're delighted to finally be able to present our winning 5, the winners of the 2024 Call for Artists for Banned Books Week. And we start with The Handmaid's Tale. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale is frequently discussed during Banned Books Week. With television and graphic novel adaptations, the novel remains in the public eye. It's been called out for use of profanity, sexual content, and being anti-Christian. One of the most recent cases being the Madison County School District in Virginia, removing this title along with 22 others from student access last year in 2023. Margaret Atwood would go on to reply to this censorship, "Good luck with that. It'll only make them want to read it more." From our winning artist, this piece is meant to convey the main themes of the book: control, fertility, and identity. The iconic red dress is the only characteristic of the woman, along with the pregnant belly. The man has a clear face, an identity, and autonomy over the woman. Kim is my lovely Miss Vanna this evening. Please join me in welcoming our first winning artist, winner of a 2023 award as well, Carly Williams.
Everybody loves to go first, don't they? Hello, good evening. My name is Carly Williams, and last year I made a piece to represent the works of Maya Angelou and her struggle against racism in a small southern town not far from where I grew up in Arkansas. Having that experience last year, winning that award, opened my eyes to the fact that there is a lot of media that we consume that has some sort of reason to be banned, especially considering how many points of view exist in the world. What is appropriate for young children? What morals and virtues are we importing to our youth? What is the author really trying to say? Politics and moral standings mar our interpretations of literature. We project our own feelings onto words that may or may not have the effect that we wanted. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood was published in 1985, 11 years after Roe v. Wade, which is the landmark decision in the U.S. Supreme Court that made access to abortions a constitutional right. The U.S. was in uproar, and not merely over this case, but this is the America Margaret Atwood was writing about. Amidst the Red Scare, in the trenches of the HIV epidemic during the Reagan years. Atwood is Canadian, but this is the U.S. that was on the center stage of the world, and it was summing up the tumultuous times happening across the whole world. It was a world that was worried about pollutants, global warming, birth rates, and basic human rights. My own interpretation of the work, whether correct or not, is focused on the main character, Offred, and her struggle to find her identity as it is actively stripped away. This book has been banned for many reasons, as Jim mentioned, but it demonizes Christianity as the main one, and has candid representations of queer people, offensive language, the F word, and many others. But Christianity is not the evil of the story. Debasing religion is not the foundation of Atwood's work. Fanaticism is. Zealotry is. Even in a world of uncertainty, one should never turn to these lengths, as written in the book, for answers. Men are not the evil, the big evil in this book either, but the idea of having a handful of men at the very top, controlling everyone, having access to unlimited resources as everyone suffers is. The man portrayed in my work is the idea of a controlling power, not a person, a singular person, who is clinging to the all-seeing eye, the idea of control and surveillance as the identity of the woman is shielded from us. All we know is that she is pregnant, and according to the plot, this is what she is meant to do: assimilate, bring forth children, and fade into nothing. I chose this work not only because it is one of my favorites and the important glimpse it gives us to the past, but The Handmaid's Tale serves a brilliant reminder of what the world is now and what could happen now. In a world rife with uncertainty and a very real reality of Project 2025 and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it is important not only to be conscious of the world around us, but to remind everybody of their own individual power. I urge you to vote, to protect your own rights, and to take control. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carly. The Name Jar is a children's picture book. Unfortunately, when it comes to book banning, it's children's literature that is targeted the most. Choi's book follows a girl named Eunhae, who immigrates to an American school from Korea. She feels anxiety over her Korean name and contemplates using an American name before she realizes, with the help of some friends, that the best name that she could use is her own. Our artist's statement: "My work highlights Eunhae's pride in her cultural identity. Instead of choosing a name that others might find easier to pronounce, she confidently selects her own, embracing her heritage. Her red name stamp boldly stands out, placed above the suggested Americanized names. Through this act, she courageously shares her story." Please welcome artist Leanne Taylor.
Thank you all, and I want to thank the library for supporting Banned Book Week and just being able to share my artwork and this book that goes with it. As you all know, that books on race and identity are so very, very important, especially now, to show the different perspectives and to give people the opportunity to see their own story. The name jar really resonated with me. I grew up as a minority in a small Arkansas town, and I not only grew up as a minority in my town, I also grew up as a minority in my family. I am a Korean adoptee, and coming to terms with my own cultural identity really resonated with me in this story. The name jar and other banned books really validate and help others feel seen through all of their different identities and perspectives in this world. So if a book has been banned, I really recommend that you try it, pick it up, and it might make you uncomfortable, it might change your viewpoint, or it just might show you the importance of your own story.
Thank you, Leanne. Moving on. The 1984 novel, The House on Mango Street, tells the coming-of-age story of 12-year-old Esperanza growing up in the Hispanic quarter of Chicago. The novel has been challenged for its sexual and racial content, and in 2010, as an example, it was one of 80 works banned in Arizona public schools under House Bill 2281. Our winning artist writes, "Poetic, heartbreaking, inspiring. These words define Cisneros' work." Cisneros, I gotta get it right. I practiced too, Cisneros. Using digital pencils and brushes, I aimed to capture the sentiment by highlighting the actual house on Mango Street. Surrounded by shades of blue, the house comes into focus as the source of growing pains, trauma, and yet a glimmer of hope. Please join me in welcoming artist Ariel Romero as we reveal the third one.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Anybody who's familiar with Esperanza's story knows that I should not be talking about it, because I am a dude. I have not experienced the Bildungsroman of being a woman in Chicago and dealing with sexuality and being raised by a group of women around her. But the reason I picked this book was one. Vignette is the peak of literary form is peak literary form, because it was one of the few books that my English teacher got me to read in high school. And so shout out to Miss Lowry for that one. But second, and I think most importantly, is that Cisneros' work is a reminder of the power of words to help overcome trauma and difficulty. And I think that The House on the Mango Street is a testament to that. Esperanza's story, while it may not have a good beginning, leaves us with hope. It leaves us with a feeling of empowerment, that we can own our own stories, that we don't have to be defined by our past, and we can make a better future. And so that's why I chose this book. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ariel. The 1991 graphic novel Maus shows the author's father's experience in the Holocaust. Mice represent Jewish people, while cats represent Nazis. While it's been challenged for language and nudity, author Spiegelman believes challenges against his work to be a part of a larger cultural war. He is quoted as saying, What I think made it an issue is that the idea of challenging one's parents is threatening to an authoritarian. And there's a lot of that going on in my book. Our next artist says, I wanted to try and capture the struggle between the two powers in a way other than violence. A tango between oppressor and oppressed. I took direct inspiration from scenes within Mouse Part 2, as they speak about how it's hard to trust another human when months earlier you would never think twice. Please welcome our next winning artist, Genevieve Brindle.
I get very nervous in public, so please bear with me for a second. I wouldn't be the first to tell you that knowing and learning from history is a valuable tool. Hopefully, I won't be the last to tell you that either, if you hang around the right crowds of people, that is. A famous quote reads to us that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. This same quote lies at the doors of the infamous and tragic Auschwitz concentration camp. If you haven't found time in your life to read Maus, A Survivor's Tale by Spiegelman, I urge you to run to your nearest library or bookstore as soon as possible. And I'm glad to see that you're already in one. I say this not only because of the incredible and gripping graphics and storytellings, but because you can in turn do your part not to repeat history. As someone with no genetic lineage tied to the Holocaust, I understand that my voice may seem as one trying to cover instead of amplify. I hope that by taking the time to create a piece of artwork that strikes conversation about something so vastly important, that it shows you truly where my heart lies. Along with this piece, I also plan to use the prize so graciously given to me by the Fayetteville Public Library to donate in part to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Palestinian Children's Release Fund, or the PCRF. Every day we are being witness to a modern-day genocide in Palestine, and I hope you take my words and look inward to the history that you surround yourselves with. Once again, I would like to say a gigantic thank you to my other fellow artists, my friends and family, and to the Fayetteville Public Library. Continue to be curious, be courageous, and be courteous. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. We just have one more. Our last novel is The Chocolate War, a novel whose ending still churns my stomach all these years later. This was required reading for me in school. It follows Jerry's nonconformity in a Catholic school and the powers that be wearing him down for speaking out and acting out, or not acting. I'll let you read it. It's been challenged for language, violence, views against the Catholic Church, and more, and has consistently received a spot on ALA's top 10 list over the decades. Our final artist is no stranger to this contest and took a very unique approach to their submission this year. Real chocolate and chocolate syrup create the imagery of the oppressive hand cornering the human figure, symbolic of manipulative forces faced by the protagonist and the book itself. The irony of banning the chocolate war is that it warns of the evil that can prevail when good people allow it. Winner of the 2022 award, the 2023 award, and now the 2024 award, please welcome artist Bryson Taylor. Appreciate it.
Well, I, like Jim, have a confession to make. I also read banned books. It is a pleasure to be here to share Banned Book Week with all of you and to kick off this next week coming up. It should be no surprise that I consider Fayetteville Public Library to be a home away from home for me. I was practically raised around these books. I have a mother who values books and taught us the value of books very early on in life, and that has absolutely altered the course of my life and my passions. In fact, it is here in the Fayetteville Public Library where I feel like I can surround myself with three great loves of mine: books, art, and community. And I also love contests like this because it gives me an opportunity to create art about things that I hold dear. I read Robert Cormier's The Chocolate War when I was in junior high school, and some of its visual elements have stuck with me. I knew I wanted to create art about it at one point or another. And usually I take an illustrative approach. That's not where I went this time. It was actually while I was attending a thesis defense about woodblock printing that I was struck with an epiphany. I had this wild idea to carve chocolate as a printing block and use chocolate syrup as printing ink. That didn't work out. If any of you can pull that off, please let me know. There probably is a way to do it. But it got me thinking about the project from a different perspective. So I used all of this chocolate and syrup that I'd purchased, and I carved the chocolate, ended up using it and dripping the syrup on pages and photographed it all, crumpled up tinfoil, and turned it into a visual collage. So all of that is carved and dripped, and it was fun to kind of get messy and play around with it. I actually still have the chocolate pieces used for this image that I'm going to go home and eat to celebrate. But it wasn't until after I finished this art that I learned that the Chocolate War is celebrating its 50th anniversary. And sadly, after all these years, is still considered, like Jim said, one of the most challenged books in the United States. In the 1980s in Florida, teachers and librarians alike faced persecution for using the book and letting students check it out. The Chocolate War is about a student who decides not to participate in a school-wide chocolate sale, and for his actions is tormented with bullying, death threats, disturbing nightly phone calls, and is ultimately assaulted and ostracized. It is then ironic that those who opposed the Chocolate War confronted its supporters with bullying, death threats, disturbing nightly phone calls, and also arson. For the people who hadn't read this book, they were doing a remarkable job of reenacting it. Once these events made the news, the author, Robert Cormier, wrote to the teachers and apologized for the grief that had been caused. He wrote, "I have been at a loss for words. The ironic thing is that words are my business, and the words I used in my book have been the cause of so much trouble." He was quoted later by one of his children saying, "I'm weary of the battle, but a tired fighter can still be a fighter." It wasn't until a group of 13-year-old students filed a federal class action lawsuit that officials returned the books back to the classroom. One of the 13-year-olds, now an adult, reflected on the events, saying, "There was no big victory. Everyone lost. It was a time when the excitement of fighting against oppression should have been uplifting, and it wasn't at all. In the end, it made the entire community suffer." Although the book was often reinstated into schools and public libraries, there were still restrictions and requirements for parents' consent to check it out. "Even when you win, you lose," said Cormier. This is not unlike the ending of The Chocolate War. The protagonist in the novel, Jerry, keeps a poster in his locker of the famous quote by T.S. Eliot, "Do I dare disturb the universe?" By the end of the novel, Jerry defeatedly tells a fellow student, "They tell you to do your thing, but they don't mean it. They don't want you to do your thing, not unless it's their thing. It's a laugh, a fake. Don't disturb the universe, no matter what the posters say." The finale of The Chocolate War is a dismal one that eats at you, and it should. In the words of Robert Cormier, he explained, "The message of The Chocolate War is that evil succeeds when good people allow it." Good people, fellow readers, a tired fighter can still be a fighter. Keep fighting. Keep reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryson. And I want to close with some thank yous. I am a librarian here, and I've been one for almost 7 years, and I do not consider myself an expert on the topic of banned books. I don't know that anyone on our staff, in our state, in our country, is an expert on this topic, and I don't think any of us need to be to bring this issue to the forefront and to continue to fight this battle. You can check out all of these books from this library, and you will continue to do so long as the powers that be have any say in the matter. So we encourage you to read these books if you're not familiar with these stories. Thank you to the artist community of Northwest Arkansas, everyone that contributed a submission to this project. It gets harder and harder every year to narrow this down. To our 5 winners, congratulations again, and thank you. Can we give another round of applause to our 5 winners? Thank you. Thank you very much. We are honored to share your works, and if you return to the library when we reopen on October 1st, you will find these in our galleries on the 3rd and 4th floor. We invite everyone to grab a snack. We have the winning trading cards from 2022 and 2023 available as well, so be sure to grab previous years. And now available for the first time, the 2024 trading cards are available on the back table. Thank you to Renee, my colleague, for being my ride or die on this project, to the library staff, our IT and marketing departments for making this come together. Thank you to Dr. Connors for your insight, sharing this important topic. And artists, please stick around for a group photo. Happy Banned Books Week, everybody. See you next time.